Hi, my name is Amanda Perry, and I'm a welder here at RuffStuff Specialties. Today we are going to be going over these single shock trailing arms, and I'm going to be showing you how I do them and the process of making them. So these trailing arms are made up of a piece of 2-inch 250 wall DOM that has a bend in it. They get a plug weld drilled in the end of it, and they also get coped on the lathe so that this piece of DOM can sit in there. So we have a piece of DOM for your bushing that is 2-inch 250 wall, 2.5 inches long. And then we have a bung that gets welded into the end for the heim joint. There's a body that sits on top of the tubing and gets welded to the tubing. There are 2 inner gussets that get welded right in there to protect it from mud getting in there. And then there are 2 outside gussets that go on either side of the welded body in the tube. So we're about to head into the shop, and I'm going to show you guys how I put these together. So right now I'm going to be drawing where we're going to be cutting off so that it sits on the tube properly. So I take my trusty straight edge and I just kind of line it up right there so that I have a straight line. We're going to Sharpie that. Okay. Then we're going to come over here, clamp that down so it doesn't move. And then we're just going to cut right on the edge of the line that is closest to the bottom so that we have plenty of room to grind down. All right, so our next step from here on out is to grind that cut edge off because we don't want to weld on top of that. That's pretty gross. So we're going to take it over to my area and we're going to grind it down. So we're going to take a grinder to this and we're going to find out how good of a cut edge I did with the plasma. So because you want it to be perfectly straight so it sits right on the tube and you get a good weld on it. So let's go ahead and do that, shall we? So I'm going to take my straight edge and I'm just going to put it up against that edge to see if it's straight. Need to grind a little bit more off. We're almost there. It's just right here that's really bugging me. Beautiful. It's also really important to get off all of that cut edge so that you don't get porosity. You don't want porosity on these guys. All right. we're going to weld our tube together. We're going to weld that bung in, and then we're also going to weld our DOM bushing on this end. So we're going to put a nice bevel on it, just about to match what's already on this bung. And while we're at it, we're going to go ahead and bevel this edge of the cope so that the weld sits flat when we go to weld it. Now we're going to go ahead and weld the bung into the back end. Just going to clean up that inside edge so our bung goes in there nicely. Tap her in there. There we go. So for this bung, I usually put my settings at 17.6 and 192 for wire speed. I'm doing it a little hotter though, because I've had some trouble with it humping up. So we'll see if that helps me. So right now we're gonna plug weld it. And then I like to tack the back side, because that'll be our start and stop point. We'll just do that really quick. And then what we like to do here is take the body and mark where it's going to sit on there so that we can hide our start and stops better. All right, so now we know where to start and stop. And I generally like to do the weld that is going to be hidden by the body first, so I can test my settings that way. I'm gonna go ahead and weld this guy. I actually think maybe down more. One side. Right. Now for the DOM bushing side. I actually have to go grab my jig. So we use this jig to hold the DOM in place while we tack it. We want to hide the start and stops underneath the body on this side too. So you really have to kind of maneuver your body. Beautiful. Our next step from here is to put the body back on. And see where it sits on those welds, because we're going to grind that part down. I like to use a cutoff wheel for precision. Make sure I'm really not getting too far over from where I want to grind. So we'll go ahead and grind this. Now we're going to see how well we did with our grinding. And the way that we're going to do that is, first I'm going to look at this gap in here, make sure that there isn't a huge gap that I'm going to blow through later when I weld it, which it looks really good. And then I kind of come from this perspective and take a peek at how far that end is sitting off of the tube. It looks really good. So we're going to clean it up and then we're going to tack this body on. So I'm just going to clean it up with some acetone before I tack the body on. Make sure there's not any stuff in there. And I also like to map coat it before I weld it too. So we're going to make sure that I put it back on there correctly. I like to make sure this part is centered just by having the same amount of difference on either side. It's about 3/16. And we have 3/16 on that side, so we're good. I'm going to go ahead and tack this guy down. I also like to measure the distance from this flat side of the bung to the body so that when I get working on the other trailing arm, I can put it the same distance. I'm gonna make sure that that is straight. And then I also like to measure from the plug weld to that bevel right there, just to get kind of, it's not a very accurate measurement, but it gives me kind of an idea if it's more one way than the other way. We have about 1/2 inch. One thing that I always like to do before I tack the sides is put the inner gussets in. You might have to grind them down a little bit. Sometimes they don't fit. But I'm actually going to check to see if this is at 1.5 to make sure that the body hasn't been squished. And it's a little tight, so we're gonna spread it open a little bit. So we're just gonna use our little trusty spreaders that we have. Make sure that it's sitting open enough. This is actually a 1.53 spacer, so it's a little bit bigger than a 1.5. Gives me a little more wiggle room. We're still gonna have to grind them a little bit. There we go. And I like to make sure that it's flush with this side. We'll just tack that guy into place really quick. Put our other guy in there. And now I'm going to show you how to tack these sides here. So I tack from the bung side towards the bushing side, and I like to mark every 4 inches. So the reason that we go every 4 inches is so that it doesn't pull. If you weld up one side of this, it's gonna warp, it's gonna pull that way. It's just all gonna be bad. Put some more MAV coat on there so we don't get splatteries. And we're gonna tack it. So I like to do 2 tacks on one side and then 2 on the other side and just flip it until the whole thing is done. Go, all tacked. So now I'm going to weld this back side and that DOM side. And what I like to do, I don't like to stand here and weld it because I'm very shaky. So I take my whole vise to where I can sit and weld it. We're going to turn up the settings to 18.4, 238, that should be good. Put a nice big nozzle on there. So this is the fun part. You get to weld the sides now. Doesn't really need to be any hotter than 18.2 and 220. And when you do this, make sure that you are very comfortable because you're going to be here for a while. So, let's get started, shall we? It's about this time that my arms start feeling like they're gonna fall off, but we're gonna keep going. We're done. So we actually go from that end to that end, and if you notice, we backstep them, and that's all heat control, minimal warpage. Obviously we do a couple on one side and then flip it to the other side, and that just kind of keeps it all straight and all together. So when I weld two welds on this side, it pulls that way, and then I flip it over, I weld the other two on that side, it'll pull it back. So I'm kind of just, because if I welded one entire side, it would all pull that way, and we don't want that. So we're gonna let that guy cool, and then we're gonna move on to the next step. All right, so now we're gonna weld the inside where the shock will sit. So let's get started. First things first, gonna put some MAV coat in there because it gets really splattery in there, and it's kind of hard to scrape it out after that. MAV coat that. Then I'm just gonna weld these top parts here. Just give it earthquake test so it doesn't fly that way. That's always awkward, dropping one of these. Then we're just gonna weld the sides here. See if I can get in there. Oops. I'm gonna have to move it a little bit. And then I like to use my left hand to get on this other side. And the reason why I'm using both hands is just because we like our welds to mirror. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. So we're going to take this spreader out. And you kind of have to work fast. So I'm actually going to put a smaller nozzle on here. And give myself a stopping point. Here we go. Okay. So we're going to fill in this bottom part here. And once again, I'm going to use my left hand. And we work fast to get that spacer back in there. And then we are going to preload that gap to 1.5, which it's already there. Awesome, I love it when it does that. So we're just gonna kind of snug it up. We don't need to do any crazy cranking down on it to spread it back open. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and set this aside to cool for a little bit while I get my overlay plates ready to weld on. Because the part number is only on one side, and so it just kind of makes it look better if you sand them, get that part number to go away, and get them to match. So now they're all nice and shiny. There's not a pesky part number in the way, and they just look much better for aesthetic purposes. All right, so our next step is to take this guy and we're gonna mark out where those overlay plates are gonna sit. So they do go on a certain way. If you notice, there's a longer side than this side, and there's also a longer side over here. So we actually need this one to go right there. We usually do about a ½ inch of space in between the edge of this plate and that hole. I just kind of line it up along with that weld on either side. I'm going to Sharpie the whole thing. All right, so we're gonna take where we just marked out and grind down the weld so that the plate lays flat. I like to use a cutoff wheel for precision on the ends here so I don't grind off too much. And then the way I like to grind this is just by staying on the body, just because you want to hide any grinder marks. You don't want it to look like you grinded it. Nice, so that's nice and flat. Go ahead and do the other side. Check our flatness. Nice and flat. So we're just going to line them back up where we had them before. Out of here. And I like to have my machine down a little bit more, like 17 volts, 170 wire speed. I'm gonna MAV coat it again because we just sanded it and we want it to look nice. I like to tack both sides. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and weld these guys on. We're just gonna take that handy dandy spacer, check our spacing. At this point, if it was too narrow, I would use my wrenches to pry it open a little bit more, but we're pretty good. So we'll leave it where it is. And that is a fully welded trailing arm. So after we weld it, we make sure to give it a nice scrape, clean it up a little bit so that when we send it out to the customer, it's not yucky. So I'm just going to scrape the splatter off of it. I'm just going to clean it up with a little bit of acetone. So do you remember how we MAV coated the inside of this? That comes in really handy right about now. All right, so now we're just gonna tap out this bung because of all the welding that we did on it. Sometimes the welding can warp the bung and your heim won't fit in there, so we'll make sure. Yeah. So I can already tell that that's gonna be tight if it doesn't freely spin. So it's a good thing we're tapping it out. Then I'm just gonna MAV coat it so it doesn't rust in shipping. And now it's ready to go on somebody's vehicle. That's really all there is to it. So I just showed you how to weld up one trailing arm. You could follow the same exact steps to weld up the other one. You could have a RuffStuff welder weld it like me and get yourself a lifetime warranty, or you could weld it up yourself following this informational video. I hope this has been really informational, and thank you for watching this video.